They mocked her old Earth jacket until the instructor fell silent like he'd seen a ghost. Part 2. 3 weeks into the seminar, Instructor Sorith stopped lecturing and started breaking things. Not physically. He broke simulations. The seminar had moved from theory to practice. Teams of 5 cadets commanding virtual fleets through reconstructions of real historical battles. The twist was Sorith. Halfway through each exercise, he changed the rules. He added ships that weren't in the original battle. He removed supply lines. He flipped gravity conditions on station maps. He turned victories into traps and watched to see who noticed first. He was not testing what the cadets had memorized. He was testing what they did when everything they had memorized stopped being true. Marin's team was her and the 3 people in the academy she could stand for more than an hour at a time. Kale ran engineering, because Kale could look at a reactor schematic the way most people look at a children's puzzle. Lissa ran communications, because she spoke 11 languages fluently and could translate Korath tactical jargon into Tavari fleet commands without pausing to breathe. The 4th was a Tavari cadet named Ossel, who was polite to Marin in the careful way that people are polite when they are not sure they should be in the same room as you, but have decided to be decent about it. The 5th was a Drenari cadet named Fen, who communicated almost entirely through bioluminescent color shifts across their skin, and who Lissa translated for with a speed that bordered on unsettling. Their simulation assignment, the Battle of Kellis Station. Every species in the Concord knew this battle. A defending fleet had held a narrow corridor approach to a critical station against an attacking force 3 times its size. It was a textbook example of positional superiority. Hold the choke point, force the enemy to come to you, make them pay for every meter. Marin's team was assigned the defending role. She set up the formation by the book. Kale reinforced the shield harmonics on the lead ships. Lissa coordinated firing solutions across the fleet. Ossel managed the reserve line with the rigid precision of someone who had been taught fleet positioning since birth. Fen pulsed a steady blue, all systems nominal, all positions held. It worked. For 40 minutes, it worked beautifully. The attacking fleet threw itself at the choke point and bled for it. Marin's fleet held the line the way the real defenders had held it 200 years ago. Then Sorith changed the game. New contacts on the scanner. A second attacking force, jumping in behind the first. Reinforcements that had not existed in the real battle. The choke point, which had been the fleet's greatest advantage, became a cage. They were pinned in a corridor, with enemies pouring in from the front and fresh ships closing from behind. Every other defending team in the exercise, there were 4 running simultaneously, did what the textbook said. They held. They reinforced the choke point. They trusted the position. Marin watched the scanner for 11 seconds. Kale counted later. 11 seconds of her staring at the new contacts, her hands flat on the console, her mouth a thin line. "We're leaving," she said. Ossel's head turned so fast his neck cracked. "Leaving the choke point is?" "The choke point is a coffin now. We leave or we die in it," she said. She gave the orders fast and flat. No discussion. Fighting withdrawal through the station's maintenance corridors. Use the station's own bulk as cover, as a weapon, as a maze that the attackers would have to navigate blind. Give up the position. Give up the station. Save the fleet. Kale executed it without question. He started blowing corridor junctions the way a man pulls weeds. Methodical, unhesitating, almost bored. Lissa relayed the retreat orders in 4 languages simultaneously, her voice never rising above the tone of someone reading a grocery list. Ossel followed, stiff with disagreement, but disciplined enough to obey. Fen pulsed a rapid amber that Lissa translated as something between "this is insane" and "this might work." They fought their way out of the station in 9 minutes. The virtual fleet lost 6 ships out of 30. Behind them, the station collapsed into a mess of blown corridors and sealed bulkheads that would take the attacking force hours to clear. They survived. No other defending team did. The debrief was in the amphitheater. All 4 teams, plus Soreth, standing at the front with his hands clasped behind his back, and his face showing exactly as much as a closed door shows. Dren Vasic spoke first. His team had held the choke point. His entire virtual fleet was dead. She surrendered the objective, Dren said, not shouting, worse than shouting, the cold, measured voice of someone who believes they are stating a fact that should be obvious to everyone. The objective was survival, Marin said. The objective was holding the station. The station was lost the second those reinforcements jumped in. I just noticed first. Dren's jaw tightened. Scales shifted color along his neck. A Korath stress response that he probably didn't know humans could see. Retreat is not a strategy. It is the absence of one. Marin looked at him with the flat patience of someone who has had this argument before, in different rooms, with different faces. Every ship I pulled out of that station is a ship that can fight tomorrow. Every ship you left in that choke point is scrap metal. You tell me which one of us has a strategy. The room was quiet. Dren had no answer that wouldn't prove her point. Soreth spoke. Cadet Grady, the withdrawal pattern you used, the sequential corridor collapses, the use of infrastructure as a defensive barrier during retreat. Where did you learn it? Marin was quiet for a beat, then another. Chosen, she said. 1950. Different war. Same math. Soreth's face did something. Small, almost invisible, a tightening around the eyes that on a Tavari face could mean recognition, or pain, or both. He looked at her the way someone looks at a word they haven't heard spoken aloud in a very long time. He moved on with the debrief. Later, the observation deck on the Academy's upper ring. Tessara Prime rotated below, its surface a patchwork of silver cities and dark ocean, lit by a sun that was the wrong color for human eyes. The light came in amber where it should have been white, and it made everything on the deck look like an old photograph. Marin sat on the floor with her back against the viewport. She was wearing the jacket. She was holding the coin from the left pocket, turning it over and over in her fingers. The coin was smooth, almost featureless. Whatever had been stamped on its faces had been worn away by decades of exactly this. Fingers turning it. Grady fingers. Kale sat next to her. He had brought coffee from the human commissary, which meant it was terrible, but it was warm, and it was theirs. He didn't ask about the coin. He asked about the name. Lieutenant W. Grady, he said, nodding at the stitching on the jacket. How many greats? Marin started counting on her fingers. Stopped. Started again. Great, great, great. I lose track. Grandmother. Way back. Flew bombers over a place that doesn't exist anymore. Doesn't exist? They bombed it until it stopped being a place. She said it the same way she said most things. Flat. Simple. Like she was reading the weather. But her thumb pressed harder on the coin. Every Grady since her either flew or fought or both, she said. Not because anyone made us, because the jacket kept fitting. Kale was quiet for a while. The station hummed around them. Somewhere below, Tessara Prime turned through another fraction of its endless rotation. Does it still fit? He asked. Marin looked out at the stars, not at any particular star, at the dark between them. Some days it's the only thing that does. Footsteps. Lissa appeared from the corridor, like she had been standing just out of sight. She sat down cross-legged on the floor next to them, and opened her paper notebook, and didn't say anything for about 30 seconds, which for Lissa was a warm greeting. Then she said the most words Marin had ever heard her say at once. Soreth requested your personnel file after today's simulation. Full record. Not just your academy scores, genealogical, your whole family line. I saw the flag on the admin feed. Marin's hand stopped moving on the coin. her thumb pressed flat against its smooth face and held there. Why? Lissa shrugged. Maybe he likes leather. Nobody laughed. Lissa hadn't expected anyone to laugh. She closed her notebook and looked out at the stars with them. The observation deck hummed. The wrong-colored light came through the viewport and turned 3 humans into something that looked like a memory. The coin sat in Marin's palm, warm from her hand, carrying the fingerprints of women she had never met. Somewhere in the Academy's administrative core, a 400-year-old Tavari instructor was reading the name Grady for the first time in a very long time, and remembering something he had spent half a century deciding not to think about. The station turned. The jacket creaked when Marin shifted. They mocked her old Earth jacket until the instructor fell silent, like he'd seen a ghost. Part 3. Sorith stood at the front of the amphitheater with his hands clasped behind his back, and said a number that made the room stop breathing. 170 million. He let it sit there. It sat the way a stone sits at the bottom of a lake, heavy and permanent and impossible to move. 57 years ago, he said, the Galactic Concord made first contact with a species that had already split the atom, walked on its own moon, and fought 2 global wars that killed a combined 170 million of its own kind. Before it had achieved faster-than-light travel. 31 cadets, 12 species. Nobody moved. Most species in this room developed FTL capability before they developed the capacity for industrial-scale self-destruction, Sorith continued. The Korath achieved warp travel during their early Harmony period, centuries before their unification war. The Tavari mastered fold space while still in their philosophical age. Even the Drenari, who came to FTL late, did so before their population exceeded 2 billion. He paused. Humans had 8 billion people on a single planet. They had weapons that could crack the surface of their own world. They had spent the better part of a century pointing those weapons at each other across lines drawn on maps. He turned and walked 3 slow steps to the left, then 3 back. It was the first time all semester he had moved during a lecture. And then, instead of ending themselves, they built a ship and flew to their moon. They did this before they had solved hunger, before they had stopped fighting, before they had done any of the things that every other species in the Concord considers a basic requirement for survival. He stopped walking. They went to space not because they were ready. They went because they refused to wait until they were. Dren raised a hand. With respect, instructor, all species have internal conflicts before achieving. The Korath Unification War lasted 11 years, Sorith said. He did not raise his voice. He simply continued speaking as though Dren had not opened his mouth. It killed 600,000. It is the bloodiest conflict in Korath history, and your species remembers it as a great tragedy. He looked at Dren. Humans lost more than 600,000 in a single battle, in a single week, on a piece of ground smaller than this station. And when that battle was over, they buried their dead and walked to the next one. Dren's hand lowered. The Tavari Schism killed 900,000 over 8 years, Sorith said. My own people still mourn it as the darkest chapter in our history. It fundamentally changed how we think about war and peace. His voice dropped, not for drama, because what he said next came from a different place inside him. Humans lost 60 million people in a single war. It lasted 6 years. When it was over, they held trials to punish the people responsible, rebuilt the nations they had destroyed, and within a decade were pointing new weapons at new enemies across new lines. They did not stop. They have never stopped. They do not have a word in any of their languages that means what the Tavari mean by lasting peace. The closest they come is a word that translates roughly as ceasefire, which tells you everything about how they see the spaces between their wars. The room was different now. Not quiet. It had been quiet before. This was something heavier than quiet. This was the particular silence of 30 intelligent beings realizing at the same time that they had fundamentally misunderstood something they thought they already knew. SeetHFY walked through the history of first contact. Not the version in the Concord textbooks, not the clean, diplomatic version that described a brief period of tension followed by a mutually beneficial integration into galactic society. He taught the real version, the one that the species who were there had quietly agreed to soften in the official records. The Concord sent an expeditionary fleet into the Sol system, he said. 12 ships. It was considered overwhelming force. The humans had no FTL, no energy shields, no weapons that operated above the speed of light. On every technical measure, it was not a contest. He stopped. Within 6 hours of detecting our fleet's approach, human military installations began broadcasting on frequencies we had not expected them to understand. They had analyzed the electromagnetic wake of our ships during approach and reverse-engineered the basic principles of our shield harmonics. He let that sit. 6 hours, from first detection to functional understanding of technology they had never seen before. We had expected to find a species that would need a generation to comprehend our presence. They needed an afternoon. Ossel, the Tavari cadet on Marin's team, shifted in his seat. His silver skin had gone a shade paler. They did not know what we were, SeetHFY said. They did not know if we were hostile. They prepared for both options with the same intensity and at the same time. This is the human method. Arm for the worst. Do both at once, and do not slow down for either. He turned to face the class fully. The Concord sent 12 ships into the Sol system. 12 was considered enough to pacify any pre-FTL civilization we had encountered in 4,000 years of expansion. The longest pause yet. Marin could hear the station's ventilation system cycling air through the amphitheater. She could hear Kale breathing next to her. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. It took the Concord 4 years to negotiate a ceasefire. Of the 12 ships we sent, 9 returned. Dren's cohort did not move. This was not in their history books. The Concord records described the first contact period as a diplomatic correction, a misunderstanding, handled efficiently, resolved through mutual respect. They did not mention the 3 ships. Humans could not match our speed, SeetHFY said. They could not match our shields. They could not match our range. They matched us in the only area that mattered. He paused. They were willing to keep fighting after the point where any rational species would have surrendered. They did not calculate acceptable losses the way the Concord does. They calculated something else entirely. They calculated what it would cost the enemy to win, and then they made sure the cost was too high. He turned to Marin. He had never addressed her directly in front of the full class, not once in the entire seminar. When he spoke to her, it was in debriefs, after hours, in the margins, never here, never in front of everyone. Cadet Grady. Marin's back straightened. The jacket creaked. The name on your jacket, Lieutenant W. Grady. She nodded. Willa Grady, SeetHFY said, pilot, flew atmospheric combat aircraft against Concord landing forces during the Battle of the Cascades, one of the first humans to engage an alien species in direct combat. 31 cadets, 12 species, all of them looking at the cracked brown leather jacket on the smallest person in the amphitheater, the faded patch, the worn collar, the name stitched in thread that used to be gold. She flew 14 missions in 9 days, SeetHFY said. Her aircraft had no shields, no energy weapons, no FTL. It was powered by a combustion engine that burned refined petroleum. It fired ballistic projectiles, metal slugs propelled by chemical explosions. By every measure the Concord uses to assess military capability, her vehicle was not a threat. His voice dropped. It did not drop for effect. It dropped the way a voice drops when it passes over a memory that still has edges sharp enough to cut. She shot down a Concorde gunship. He stopped speaking. Not a pause, a stop. Full and complete. He stood at the front of the amphitheater and looked at the jacket the way a person looks at a headstone. The way someone looks at a place where something happened that changed the shape of everything that came after. Dren shifted in his seat. The sound was very loud in the silence. Humans do not fight the way the Concorde fights, Soreth said. The Concorde fights to win. Humans fight the way a cornered animal fights, not to win, to make the cost of victory so high that winning becomes losing. He looked at Marin, at the jacket, at the name. That jacket is older than my last 3 students' entire species history of powered flight. It has been in combat that your textbooks will not teach you, because your textbooks were written by the species who had to sit across a table from the humans who wore it, and pretend they were not afraid. He turned back to the class. His hands went behind his back. His posture returned to its usual iron line. We are not studying humans this module because they are new to the Concorde. We are studying them because in 400 years of teaching this course, they are the only species that has ever made me reconsider what the word threat means. He resumed the lecture. His voice returned to its normal register. He discussed fleet positioning and supply chain doctrine and the strategic implications of the Tessara Accords. He did not mention the jacket again. He did not look at Marin again. The class ended. Cadets filed out. The Korath went first, their footsteps heavier than usual, their voices absent. The Tavari followed, silver faces unreadable. The Drenari pulsed no color at all, which Lissa had once explained meant they were processing something too large for a simple emotional response. Marin stayed in her seat. Kale stayed next to her. Lissa stayed in the back row. The amphitheater emptied until it was just the 3 of them, and the hum of the station, and the amber light coming through the high windows. Marin's hand was in the left pocket of the jacket. Her fingers found the coin, held it. Willa Grady, combustion engine and metal slugs, and a jacket made from the skin of an animal, flying into the teeth of a civilization that had mastered the stars. 14 missions, 9 days. She didn't come home from the 15th. Marin sat in the empty amphitheater and held the coin and said nothing. The jacket sat on her shoulders, the way it had sat on shoulders before hers, heavy in the places that mattered, warm everywhere else. Dren passed her in the corridor 20 minutes later. He did not look at her. He did not look at the jacket. They mocked her old Earth jacket, until the instructor fell silent like he'd seen a ghost. Part 4. The final simulation was built to be unwinnable. Nobody said that out loud. Soreth certainly didn't. But Marin had studied enough military history to recognize the shape of a test designed not to measure victory, but to measure what happened in the space between losing and giving up. 40 cadets, full-scale tactical engagement, a joint coalition fleet against an AI opponent modeled on the Vren swarm incursion of 2341, the battle that had nearly broken the Concorde's entire coreward border, and had required the combined fleets of 9 species to stop. 40 cadets were being asked to do what 9 species had barely managed, with fewer ships, with no real-world experience. Soreth stood in front of them and assigned command roles like a man distributing weights to see which backs would break first. Coalition Fleet Command, he said, goes to Cadet Grady. The room fractured, not loudly, the way ice fractures, a sound you feel more than hear. 37 non-human cadets and 2 humans all processing the same information at different speeds and arriving at different conclusions. Dren Vasic stood up. Instructor, Coalition Command has traditionally been assigned to the highest-ranked species representative in the exercise. That would be Coalition Command, Soreth said, goes to the cadet I judge most likely to keep the fleet alive. He looked at Dren the way a cliff looks at rain. Sit down. Dren sat. The simulation suite was a circular room at the heart of the Academy's tactical wing. Holographic projectors turned the air into a three-dimensional map of space. Stars, fleet positions, enemy contacts, all rendered in light that you could walk through. The command chair sat at the center. Whoever sat in it existed inside the battle. Ships exploded around your head. Damage reports scrolled past your eyes. The dead accumulated in numbers that floated at the edge of your vision like flies. Marin sat in the chair. The jacket creaked against the headrest. Kale took engineering. His station was a wall of reactor readouts and shield metrics that he watched the way a hawk watches a field. Total stillness, total attention, ready to move the instant something twitched wrong. Lissa took communications. 6 species tactical languages flowing through her earpiece, each one requiring different syntax, different cultural context, different assumptions about what constituted an acceptable order. She translated between them without pause. She had not blinked in 4 minutes. Kale was counting. Fen took secondary status display. Their bioluminescent skin became a real-time visual feed for the entire bridge. Blue for stable, amber for caution, red for critical. Every cadet on the command deck could read Fen's skin from across the room. Ossel took the reserve line. His silver hands moved across his console with the precision of a surgeon. The simulation began. For the first hour, Marin commanded the way her file said her family had always commanded in combat. Minimum words, maximum clarity. She spoke in short sentences that left no room for interpretation. Kale, reinforce port shields. Lissa, tell the Korath wing to compress formation. They're drifting wide. Fen, light blue if the Tavari reserves are in position. Fen lit blue. The Vren swarm came in waves. The AI was modeled on the real swarm's tactics. Overwhelming numbers, distributed intelligence, a willingness to sacrifice thousands of individual units to create openings. It was like fighting a river. You could block one channel, and the water would find 3 more. Marin blocked the channels, 1 by 1, then 2 at a time, then 5. She rotated her flank ships to prevent fatigue. She used the Korath wing, Dren's wing, as a hammer, striking where the swarm bunched up. She used the Tavari reserves as a wall, absorbing pressure while the hammer swung. It worked. For an hour, it worked. Then the AI adapted. The swarm stopped attacking the fleet. It started attacking the supply line. Cargo ships, fuel transports, the thin thread of logistics that kept the coalition fleet fed and armed and alive. 1 by 1, the support vessels winked off the holographic display. Each one a small light going dark. Each one a calculation of how many more hours the fleet could fight before the guns went empty and the shields went cold. The simulation shifted from a battle to a siege. Supply line is down 40%, Kale reported, his voice the same as always, flat, steady, the voice of a man reading a fuel gauge while the engine burns. Marin pulled the Korath wing back from their offensive position. It cost them a tactical advantage they had spent 30 minutes earning. Dren's voice came across the comm, tight with fury. You're wasting our strength. We had them pinned. I'm keeping you alive to use it later, Marin said. Hold position. We can break through if... Hold position. The comm went quiet. Dren held. The siege tightened. The AI sprung its trap, a second swarm force, hidden behind a gas cloud, hitting the fleet's weakest point. The Tavari reserve line buckled. Ships died in clusters. The attrition counter in the corner of Marin's vision climbed past numbers that would represent tens of thousands of lives in a real engagement. 100,000, 200,000. Fen went solid red, every inch of their skin, the color of a wound. Marin went still. Her hands were flat on the console. Her eyes were open, but focused on something that wasn't in the room. Kale watched her, and felt the back of his neck prickle. He had seen this stillness before, not in her, in old footage, grainy, two-dimensional recordings from an era when humans captured their wars on film. Commanders standing in rooms full of noise, going quiet the way the center of the storm goes quiet, calculating the one thing nobody else in the room was willing to calculate. Kale. Her voice was steady, not brave steady, not calm steady, the steadiness of a rope pulled to its last thread. If I take the command ship and the escort wing into the gap in their line, right into it, not around it, how long can we hold it open? Kale ran the numbers. His fingers moved across the console. His face told the answer before his mouth did. 11 minutes. Maybe 12. He looked at her. The command ship won't survive it. But the fleet gets through the gap. The fleet gets through. The holographic display turned around them, slow and bright. Enemy contacts swarming. Friendly ships dying. The math of the situation written in light that passed through Marin's body like she was already a ghost. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Grady. Her voice carried across the comm to every cadet, every console, every simulated bridge in the exercise. I'm taking the command group into the breach. You will have a window. 11 minutes. Use it. Regroup on the far side of the corridor and hit the swarm supply nodes. That is how you win this. Grady out. Dren's voice, stripped of its usual cold authority. Just bare words. That's a suicide run. Copy that, Marin said. Nothing else. She flew the command ship into the gap. The escort wing followed. 5 ships against the throat of the swarm, not to win, but to hold the door open long enough for everyone behind them to get through. The simulation rendered it in detail that felt cruel. Shields failing in layers, peeling away like skin. Hull breaches opening along the command ship's spine, venting atmosphere into the vacuum. Systems going dark one by one. Weapons first, then sensors, then comms, then life support. The escort ships dying around her, each one a name on a roster, each one a calculation she had already made. 11 minutes and 38 seconds. The fleet poured through the gap behind her. Every ship she had saved, every wing she had pulled back, every unit she had preserved through an hour of patient, grinding defense. All of them flew through the door she held open with the burning wreck of her command. The command ship was destroyed. The fleet won. The simulation ended. The holographic display collapsed. The lights came up. The circular room was just a room again. Blank walls, humming projectors, 40 cadets blinking in the sudden flatness of reality. Marin stood at the console. Her hands were still flat on the surface. Her eyes were on the screen in front of her, which read in plain white text, "Command vessel lost, all hands." Nobody spoke. Sorith stood at the back of the room. He had watched the entire exercise. His silver face was unreadable. His eyes were on Marin, on the jacket, on the name stitched above the pocket, in thread the color of weak tea. Who had flown 14 missions in 9 days, in an aircraft made of aluminum and fuel, against ships that could burn cities from orbit? Who had gone up a 15th time, knowing the math as well as her great-great-great-granddaughter knew it now? Marin's hand went to the left pocket. The coin. She turned it once between her fingers. Put it back. "That's the Grady play," she said. Her voice was quiet, talking to no one, talking to everyone, talking to a woman dead 500 years, whose name was still warm on her chest. "You hold the door. Somebody gets through." The room stayed silent. 40 cadets, 12 species, 400 years of collective military tradition, and not a single one of them had a word for what they had just watched. Kale stood at his station. His hands were shaking. He put them in his pockets. Lissa was still at comms. Her notebook was open. She had written a single line on the page during the final 11 minutes. It read, she didn't hesitate. Fenn's skin slowly faded from red to a deep, steady violet that no one in the room had seen before. When Lissa translated the color later, she said it didn't have an exact equivalent in any human language. The closest she could get was, "I have witnessed something that I will carry." Soreth left the room without speaking. His footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Slow, measured. The footsteps of a very old man walking away from something that had confirmed a fear he had carried for 57 years. Humans did not fight to win. They fought to hold doors. They mocked her old Earth jacket, until the instructor fell silent, like he'd seen a ghost. Part 5. The grand atrium of Tessara Prime was built to hold 10,000 beings at once. It was the largest enclosed space on the station, a cathedral of pale stone and living light, where the Concord held its most important ceremonies. The ceiling was a transparent dome that showed the stars, and on graduation day, those stars looked down on rows and rows of cadets in dress uniforms, standing in formations organized by species, waiting to become officers. Marin stood in the human row. There were 11 of them, 11 humans graduating out of a class of 300. She wore her dress uniform, dark blue, fitted, new. The jacket was folded over her left arm. Kale stood next to her. His uniform barely fit. His shoulders strained the seams in a way that suggested the Concord's tailoring department had not planned for a human built like a vending machine. He kept rolling his neck, trying to loosen the collar. Lissa stood on Marin's other side, paper notebook in her jacket pocket, pen clipped to the collar. She looked exactly the same as she always looked, which was like someone who had wandered into the wrong ceremony and decided to stay out of politeness. The ceremony began with the standard rituals, species anthems, fleet hymns, a color guard from the Tavari Honor Regiment that moved with the kind of precision that made you feel like you were watching geometry come alive. Then Soreth took the podium. 400 years old, silver-skinned, tall enough that the podium, built for an average-sized Tavari, came up to his midsection. He stood behind it and looked out over 10,000 faces, and for the first time in Marin's experience, he seemed to be measuring the weight of what he was about to say. In 4 centuries of service to this academy, he began, I have had the privilege of training the finest military minds the Concord has produced. Korath strategists, Tavari fleet commanders, Drenari intelligence officers. I have watched species rise to greatness within these walls, and carry that greatness into the stars. His voice filled the atrium without effort. It was a voice built for rooms like this. Or maybe rooms like this had been built for voices like his. I have also had the privilege, he said, of being wrong. A ripple through the crowd, small, the kind of ripple that happens when 10,000 beings all shift slightly at the same time. 57 years ago, humans were admitted to this academy. It was controversial. Many of my colleagues objected. They argued that a species with barely 60 years of Concord membership, no established military tradition within galactic structures, and a persistent habit of wearing outdated clothing had not earned a place among the Concord's officer class. A pause. His eyes moved across the atrium until they found the human row. I was among those who objected. Marin stood very still. The jacket sat on her arm, heavy and warm, the leather pressing against the crook of her elbow. I objected because I remembered, Soreth said. I am old enough to remember what humans did to our ships with projectile weapons and combustion engines. I am old enough to remember sitting in a command center and watching a species that had no right to survive against us refuse to stop fighting. I am old enough to remember the day the Concord's military council looked at the numbers from the Sol campaign and realized that winning would cost more than losing. Silent. I am old enough, he said, to remember being afraid. He let the word sit there, afraid. a 400-year-old veteran of 3 interstellar wars, standing in front of the largest military graduating class in Concorde history. And the word he chose was afraid. I have spent 57 years watching humans in this academy. I have watched them arrive with less funding than any other species delegation. I have watched them use equipment that their fellow cadets discarded 2 generations ago. I have watched them be mocked for their short lives, their fragile bodies, their sentimental attachment to physical objects that serve no tactical purpose. His gaze dropped, just for a moment, to the jacket folded over Marin's arm. I was wrong to object, but not for the reason you might expect. He straightened. Humans have not proven themselves equal to the other species of the Concorde. Another ripple. Confused. They have proven themselves something more dangerous than equal. The atrium went very still. They have proven themselves unpredictable. They carry their dead into battle, not as data in a file, not as doctrine in a manual, but as leather and thread and names they will not let the universe forget. They do not fight for territory or resources or political ideology. They fight because someone they loved fought before them, and they would rather die in the same jacket than live having taken it off. Marin's hand tightened on the folded lever. Not a flinch, a hold. The way you hold something that is holding you back. In the final tactical simulation of this year's advanced seminar, SeetHFY said, a human cadet was given command of a coalition fleet. She was the youngest officer candidate in the exercise. She commanded a force drawn from 12 species, most of whom had never taken orders from a human before. He paused. When the battle turned against her, she flew her command ship into the enemy's line and held it open for 11 minutes so that her fleet could survive. She sacrificed her command. She sacrificed, in the terms of the simulation, her life. She did this without hesitation. She did this because 500 years ago, a woman with the same name flew an aircraft made of metal and fire into the guns of the Concorde's own fleet, and held a different door open for different people. And the woman in my seminar had grown up with that story pressed against her chest every single day. He looked at Marin. This is not sentiment. This is not nostalgia. This is a species that encodes its survival instinct in objects, and passes them from hand to hand, across centuries. And every hand that touches them adds another layer of willingness to be the one who does not come back. His voice was quiet now. Not soft, quiet. The quiet of deep water. To the graduates of this academy, I offer congratulations and confidence. You are prepared. You are capable. You will serve the Concorde well. He paused. To the Concorde itself, I offer counsel. Do not mock what humans carry. Do not laugh at their relics. Do not dismiss the cracked leather and faded thread as weakness or backwardness or sentiment. Every scar on that material is a lesson their species paid for in blood, and they remember every payment. They remember when we have forgotten. They carry it when we have moved on. He straightened to his full height, 7 feet of silver and certainty, and 400 years of watching species rise and fall. This is why they frightened me 57 years ago. This is why they frighten me still. He stepped back from the podium. The atrium was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the applause started. Not from the human section. From the Tavari. Then the Drenary. Then slowly, the Korath. It spread across 10,000 beings in a wave that built until the stone walls hummed with it, and the stars through the dome seemed to shake. The ceremony continued. Commissions were granted. Names were called. Species representatives accepted their ranks with the rituals of their cultures. Korath salutes, Tavari bows, Drenary color displays that turned the room into a living painting. When Marin's name was called, Lieutenant Marin Grady, she walked to the stage, carrying the jacket over her arm. She shook hands with the Concorde Admiral who presented it. She turned to face the atrium. Then she put the jacket on. Brown leather, cracked at the elbows, worn soft at the collar, the faded squadron patch on the left shoulder, the name stitched in thread the color of weak tea above the right breast pocket. And now pinned to the collar, a brand new rank insignia, Lieutenant's bars, sitting right next to letters that spelled a name from 500 years ago. The atrium did not laugh. Afterward, the observation deck, same spot, same amber light from the wrong-colored sun. Tessera Prime turning below like it always turned. Like it would keep turning long after everyone on this deck was dust. Kale sat on the floor, with his back against the viewport. He had already loosened his collar. He had brought a bottle of something from the human commissary that was technically not allowed on the observation deck, which was why he had brought it. Lissa sat cross-legged with her notebook. She was writing. She was always writing. Marin sat between them, wearing the jacket, rank insignia glinting in the amber light. Footsteps in the corridor. Heavy. Precise. Dren Vasek stepped onto the observation deck. He stood at a distance that, for a Korath, communicated deep formality. His posture was rigid. His hands were at his sides. He looked like someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was not entirely confident he would get through it. Lieutenant Grady. Marin looked up. I owe you a debt of recognition. In the simulation you spent your command so that my wing could survive. I did not understand the decision at the time. I called it a suicide run. It was a suicide run, Marin said. Yes, his jaw worked. Scales shifted along his neck. But it was also something else. Something I did not have a framework for. I have spent 3 weeks trying to find the Korath word for what you did, and there is not one. He looked at the jacket. Now I think I understand what you carry. He inclined his head, a deep, slow bow from the neck, a gesture that Lissa would later explain was reserved for acknowledged elders of a warrior line. It had not been offered to a human before. It had not been offered to anyone under the age of 100 before. He straightened, turned, walked away. His footsteps faded down the corridor. The observation deck was quiet. The station hummed. Kale leaned over. So, what's next, Lieutenant? Marin put her hand in the left pocket. The coin, the folded paper, the multi-tool, everything a Grady needed, everything a Grady had ever needed. She looked out at the stars. Not at any particular star. At the space between them. The dark places where no one had gone yet, because no one had been willing to be the first one through the door. Same thing as always, she said. Find a door. Hold it open. The leather creaked when she shifted. 500 years of flight and falling and getting back up pressed against her ribs. A name on her chest that was hers and was not hers, and was every woman who had worn it before her, going all the way back to a pilot in a metal plane who had looked up at ships from another world and had not turned around. Tessera Prime turned below them. The stars burned above them. The jacket sat on Marin's shoulders the way it had always sat on Grady's shoulders, heavy where it mattered, warm everywhere else. Somewhere out there, past the light of known stars, past the borders of Concord space, past the last map system and the last charted corridor, there was a door that needed holding. A Grady would be there. They mocked her old Earth jacket, until the instructor fell silent, like he'd seen a ghost. Part 1. The chair was built for something with backward-bending knees, and a spine that curved the wrong way. Marin Grady had been at the academy for 3 years, and she still had to carry a multi-tool in her left pocket, just to adjust the seat bolts every time she sat down in a new classroom. She got there early. She always got there early. Not because she was eager, because a 5'6" human woman needed a 10-minute head start on furniture built for species that averaged 7 feet tall. The seminar hall on Tessera Prime was a tiered amphitheater, carved from pale stone, that hummed faintly with the station's power grid. 30 seats arranged in a half-circle, each one designed for a different body shape. The human seats were in the back corner. There were 3 of them. The math of humanity's place in the galactic concord, expressed in furniture. Marin knelt under the desk, cranked the seat down to its lowest setting, and sat. The jacket creaked as she settled in. It always creaked. Brown leather, cracked at the elbows, worn soft at the collar. There was a squadron patch on the left shoulder, so faded it looked like a bruise. Above the right breast pocket, stitched in thread that had once been gold and was now the color of weak tea, a name. Lieutenant W. Grady. The other cadets started filtering in. A pair of Tavari, silver-skinned, tall as doorways, moving with the slow grace of people who had centuries to get where they were going. A cluster of Drenari, their bioluminescent skin pulsing soft green as they communicated in colors that most species couldn't read. A group of Korath, reptilian and broad-shouldered, their footsteps heavy and precise on the stone floor. Kale Torin came in and dropped into the seat next to her. He was the second human, built like someone had stacked 2 normal people on top of each other and forgotten to stop. From Anchorage, Alaska, engineering track. He had a way of smiling that made you think he was planning something, even when he was just breathing. "You wore the relic," he said. "I always wear the relic. You know today's the advanced seminar, the one with all the species that think we still live in caves. Then they can enjoy the cave fashion." Kale almost smiled. Almost. The third human was already in the back row. Lissa Wong, Pacific Northwest, linguistics track. She had a notebook made of actual paper, not a datapad, not a holo display, paper, and she was writing in it with a pen. She did not look up when Marin and Kale sat down. She did not look up when the Korath cadets entered. Marin had known Lissa for 2 years, and had heard her speak maybe 40 times total. The Korath entered like they owned the room. 4 of them, all from military families with bloodlines that stretched back further than human civilization. At the front was Dren Vasek, top-ranked cadet in the cohort. Cold eyes, perfect posture, a uniform that fit like it had been grown onto his scales. He spotted the jacket before he spotted Marin. His eyes landed on it the way eyes land on something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. He said something in Korath to his cohort. The sound was low and percussive, like rocks knocking together underwater. They laughed. Marin was adjusting her desk height. The bolts were stiff. Dren said it again, louder, and this time a Tavari cadet in the middle row turned to look. Then another. The laughter spread. Not vicious, not exactly. Confused. Genuinely, deeply confused. This was the Advanced Tactical History Seminar. Every cadet in this room had earned their place through aptitude scores and simulation rankings that put them in the top fraction of the academy. And this human woman had walked in wearing what appeared to be the skin of a dead animal. Every other cadet wore nanoweave uniforms or bioadaptive field suits, fabrics that regulated temperature, deflected minor impacts, and adjusted to the wearer's species in real time. Marin was wearing a jacket that predated faster-than-light travel by about 400 years. Dren switched to Common, the shared language of the Concord, so everyone could appreciate the joke. "Is that a cultural garment? A religious obligation?" He tilted his head, a Korath gesture that meant something between amusement and pity. "Because if not, I have to ask, does your species not have access to textiles from this century?" More laughter. The Tavari were polite about it, just a tightening around their silver eyes. The Drenari flickered orange, which Marin had learned meant second-hand embarrassment. The Korath didn't bother being polite at all. Kale's jaw tightened. His hands went flat on the desk. Marin finished adjusting her chair, sat back, folded her hands. "It's a jacket," she said. That was it. No defense, no explanation, no fire in her voice. Just 3 words, delivered with the flat calm of someone who had been asked this question, or questions like it, enough times that the answer had worn smooth. The door at the base of the amphitheater opened. Instructor Valen Soreth entered the room, and the laughter stopped. Not faded, stopped. Like someone had reached into the air and pinched it shut. He was Tavari, 7 feet tall, silver-skinned, 400 years old by human counting. He wore no rank insignia. He didn't need any. He moved with the specific quiet of a person who had never once, in 4 centuries, needed to raise his voice, because every room he entered had already decided to listen. He stood at the front, surveyed the cadets. His gaze moved across the rows the way a searchlight moves across water. Steady, thorough, missing nothing. It passed over Marin without pause. It passed over the jacket without pause. The Korath Tavari border engagements of the 2090s, he said. No greeting, no introduction. Who can explain the flanking doctrine used in the Second Weimar Corridor campaign? Dren's hand went up first. Of course it did. This was Korath military history, his blood. He answered. The answer was clean, precise, textbook perfect. He described the 3-pronged flanking approach that Korath fleet commanders had used to overwhelm Tavari defensive positions along the corridor, collapsing their formation from the outside in. Soreth nodded, with the acknowledgement that the answer was not wrong. Marin's hand went up. The room shifted, not visibly, the air shifted. 30 cadets and 1 400-year-old instructor watched the woman in the dead animal jacket raise her hand in a discussion about Korath military doctrine. Soreth looked at her. Cadet Grady. She did not correct Dren, she extended him. The flanking doctrine Cadet Vasek described was effective against the Tavari defensive posture of that era, she said, but the same doctrine, 3-pronged envelopment against a fixed defensive line, was independently developed by human naval commanders during a conflict called the Pacific Theater, about 500 years ago. She paused. The room was very still. They abandoned it. The doctrine failed against an enemy that was willing to absorb losses at a rate the attacker hadn't modeled for. The math breaks when the defender doesn't retreat. Not with anger. With the particular blankness of someone who has just been told that his proudest military innovation was old news on a planet that hadn't even invented warp drive yet. And what was the human solution? Soreth asked. His voice had not changed. His posture had not changed. But he had asked a follow-up question. And in 3 years at this academy, Marin had never once seen him ask a follow-up question to a cadet's comment. Island hopping, Marin said. Skip the fortified positions. Starve them out. Hit what they're not defending. Soreth looked at her for a long moment. His silver eyes gave away nothing. 400 years of practice at giving away nothing. He moved on with the lesson. Marin sat back in her adjusted chair, in her dead animal jacket, with her hands folded and her face showing nothing at all. In the left pocket, next to the multi-tool, a folded piece of paper and a coin with no markings that anyone on this station would recognize, pressed against her thigh through the worn leather lining. Nobody laughed at the jacket for the rest of the class. But nobody had stopped thinking about it, either.